This is very interesting. First, let me say a couple of things. Let me go philosophical. Let me go pragmatically and policy. Philosophically, I guess I would call myself a Hume, Smith, Burkean. No two ways about it. Happy to say so. But when we're talking about the size and role of government in the 19th century, when we're talking about things Lincoln did, things that were done by Jefferson and others and Hamilton, these were done in the context where our national policy was still tethered to the founding principles, was still tethered to the idea of America. I would argue in the 20th century, look, I grew up in Janesville, Wisconsin, right outside of Madison. Progressivism basically came from the Germans to Madison and then out for everywhere else. So I'm very familiar with my Weber and Hegel and all this stuff. I think we changed that idea. We went from universally accepting in this country that our rights, like the Declaration says, come from nature and God, not from government, to one where government now invents and creates new rights for us, where it's government's job to distribute rights. And if government can give us these rights, like health care, then government can ration it. They can regulate it. They can redistribute it. They can determine how, if, why, or when we get it. And so I do believe that the idea of the role of government has changed. And I do believe that there are people in town here on the left who believe it should change. You might mention the top echelon of the people at the NEC over at the White House, who are the people who are not winning the arguments over there, I would argue. But I want to invite you to come to the Ways and Means Committee and look at the top echelon of the Democrats over there. Because I'll just give you a vignette. When we were debating health care when the House bill passed, public option and everything like that, it's about midnight. We were a long day. Everybody was tired. Emotions were raw. Speaker after speaker, whether it was Obie or Pelosi or Waxman, came to the floor saying, by golly, this is finally it. The third wave of progressivism where we finally can transform America to what it needs to be. So I do believe that there are strict adherents to that philosophy in leadership positions on the left. Not all Democrats are like that. Let me tell you, there's a difference in a chasm developing between the Brookings, Rivlin, Erskine Bowles types and the ones I've just mentioned. And so we do have to settle this question, I believe. What is the role of government? Is it equal opportunity or is it equal outcomes? Big difference. What is equality? And we have to settle that. Because if you take a look at the genesis behind the ideas from the left, it goes in a different direction. And so, yes, I guess it is stark. But so philosophically, I do have an issue with that. But pragmatically, I have an issue with it because of the numbers. The numbers are vicious. And what I'm talking about with the viciousness of our numbers, demographics is destiny, and our debt situation is so bad that it compounds so viciously that we've got to settle this soon. How we respond to preempting this debt crisis really will determine the outcome of this debate, whether we want it to or not. What I mean when I say that is, do we turn these entitlement programs, which are right now defined benefit programs, spiraling out of control, into defined contribution systems, where we do bottom-up reforms, empowering the individual, or do we stick with the government-centric top-down reforms where the government controls these markets of our economy? If we stick with that design, which is a European-based design, then it's austerity. Then it's managed decline. Because take a look at just interest on the debt right now, $200 billion, pretty low compared to what we're looking at. $1 trillion by the end of the budget window if interest rates stay where they are. They're not going to stay where they are. They're going to go up. $5.4 trillion more in interest payments within the first 10 years if we just go back to the average of the 80s. What I'm trying to say is, if we don't turn this thing around soon, the interest on the debt itself just catches us and puts us into a managed decline situation, not unlike Japan, where even if our economy is growing, which then interest rates go up, it's not enough to service our debt. It's not enough to give us a limited government, free enterprise, low tax rate opportunity society. 4 basic foundations for economic growth need to be re-adhered to, which are not being adhered to. Low tax rates, sound money, regulations that do not involve crony capitalism, big government and big business joining in common cause, but are predictable, transparent, and reasonable, and spending control and spending discipline so that we can show the world and our countrymen we're getting this debt under control, we're going to absorb the boomers, get it under control, and move on. So what I would say is, it's not as if people like Arthur and I want to have a stark debate that is chosen right now. We have to because of the numbers, because of the demographics, and yes, because of the motivations from others who would like to have more of a defined benefit collectivist type of system. We just created 2 new healthcare entitlements in the last year on top of the other two, which are bankrupting us. GAO told us 3 years ago we have a $62.9 trillion unfunded liability. Last year it was $76.4 trillion. 2 weeks ago it's $88.6 trillion. This thing's going out of control, and so we have to win the idea of what this country is, what it stands for, if we're going to have a government in the 21st century that resembles anything like what Lincoln had or what we had in the 20th century. And so compromise is a good word. I just said this at the last thing I was at. So long as you're compromising in the right direction in fulfillment of your principles. I'll take an inch rather than a mile if I can get an inch in the right direction. But I don't want to take an inch backwards, because looking at the storm horizon that's on the horizon, it will indent us to a very, very ugly future where we won't be able to make these kinds of choices. We won't be able to have an energetic government response to the problems of our days, because we'll be sucked down by this debt crisis, which will be paying more and more to creditors overseas, and our tax rates will be so high that it will stifle growth and innovation. So yes, the way I see it, we owe the country a choice. And yes, it needs to be brought to a clear choice, because if we don't, then we will muddle through this system and we will end up with this kind of managed decline society. And I do believe it is a choice. A prosperous, free opportunity society with a safety net versus the cradle-to-grave society, where we turn that safety net into a hammock. And that is just the economic consequence of what's in front of us. And yes, there is a philosophical difference of opinion. Lots of Democrats don't share that difference of opinion, but many do. And so I'm not trying to be partisan. I believe a centrist coalition is developing. Rivlin Ryan is a perfect example of it. Erskine Bowles is a perfect example of a centrist coalition that's a right-of-center coalition developing, where revenues and expenditures, now the vote is, are coming together. But that means the progressivist left will be separated from the centrist Democrats, and they're going to have to make their minds up on that. And I believe this coalition is going, and I unfortunately have to go vote.